It was time for new tires and brakes on our 2011 Rubicon. We figured that was the best time to go ahead and do a mild lift with new wheels, 35's, and upgraded brakes. I did a lot of research on what lift would be best. I wanted off-road capability, but also to retain good road handling, at least as good as it can be for a lifted Jeep. I came to the conclusion that the AEV 2.5-inch XT Dual Sport would be the best option. It's a fairly complete kit with new springs, shocks, rear track bar, and bump stops, and it had the best reviews for on-road handling out of the options. I chose to do a few optional extras along with the lift kit. I picked up the AEV Geometry Correction Brackets, replacement rough country sway bar links for the rear, and a JKS adjustable track bar for the front. Also a big brake upgrade, but that's its own video. For the wheels, I went with Quadratec's Baja Extreme 2s. Tires, I went with Gladiator XComp MT mud trains in 315, 70, R17s. A couple things about deciding on this setup. If this didn't already have 410 gears, I would be doing a re-gear also. When I rebuilt the transmission in this Jeep at 90,000 miles, I also added a Mopar transmission cooler kit and a shift kit. Later models came stock with a cooler, but this one didn't have it, and it's probably a good idea with the extra strain from the larger tires. I won't go larger than 35s on stock axles. I think that about covers the pre-install details, so let's get to the install. I found the kit to be of high quality, but the instructions were lacking a bit. Step 1. Raise the Jeep and support the frame, so the rear axle can be lowered enough to remove the springs. Support the axle with a floor jack. Remove the wheels. I like to be extra careful when I'm going to be under a vehicle. I supported this with 4 jack stands and chocked the wheels. Step 2. Loosen but do not remove all 8 control arm bolts. All of these were 21mm. A huge ratchet is nice for these jobs. They all loosened easily for me. When it says loosen, it just means to relieve the pressure from the rubber bushing, otherwise you'll get something like this. Step 3. Remove the track bar. Nothing too special here, just 2 21mm bolts. I think it might have been easier to remove the lower one first, either way it just fell right out. Step 4. Remove the bolts that hold the brake lines to the frame. These are 10mm and came out easily for me. I didn't even lose my socket. Step 5. Remove the shocks. The top bolts might be easier to do first, as the pressure on the lower bolt made it hard to remove. The lower bolts are 18mm and the tops are 16mm. Step 6. Remove the sway bar end links. 18mm for the nut on the top, and I used a 3/4 for the back nut because I couldn't find my 19mm wrench. The bottom bolt is 18mm on both ends. Step 7. Lower the axle using the floor jack enough to remove the springs. Do not overextend the wheel speed sensor or locker wiring. There are some clips that can be released to give extra room. I also disconnected the vent tube. Step 8. Remove the factory springs. A self-fulfilling prophecy for me. That's it for the rear disassembly. Now comes the installation for the rear. Step 1. Install the track bar tower. Tighten the U-bolt to no more than 40 foot-pounds. Use the supplied bolt and washer in the bottom hole and tighten to 80 foot-pounds. Install the new track bar, reusing factory hardware to install the track bar, reversing the direction of the hex bolt as shown. Do not tighten at this point. The instructions aren't very clear here. There are 5 identical 19mm nuts, 4 on the U-bolts and 1 for the lower bracket bolt, and a 21mm flared nut. The flared nut replaces the factory flag nut on the factory track bar bolt. The flared nut loosely fits on the lower bracket bolt, so just don't get them mixed up. The flared nut on the track bar will go toward the rear of the Jeep. The U-bolts and bracket installed easily, and this seems to be a very well designed bolt-on bracket that I don't think will work loose. I've seen some bad ones, like the one on my 94 Jeep, but luckily it has leaf springs and doesn't really need a track bar. The top track bar bolt was a cinch. I had some difficulty getting the track bar into the new bracket, and I think if I put it in there before tightening the bottom bolt, it would have been easier. The track bar is not to be tightened at this point, as you want the bushings to be mostly aligned at ride height before tightening so they're not under constant strain. There's a dramatic difference in the rear springs. The new ones are about 2.5 inches longer at 17 inches and have many more coils. Step 2. Install new springs. I had to put my second floor jack under the opposite side of the axle to make enough room to wiggle the first spring in. For the other side, I had to give some slack to the parking brake cable to make room. Make sure to index the springs as pictured. Step 3. Install new bump stop spacers. I would recommend installing the bump stops last before the tires go back on, as they are kind of in the way for some other bolts. The new shock is about 2 inches longer than the old one. It's also much stiffer and rebounds much quicker. Step 4. Install new shocks at the upper mount, raise the axle slowly and guide springs into position. I found it easier to get one top bolt started than hook the shock onto it. Notice they left out the torque for the upper bolts. They do give a list of torque specs in the back of the instructions. It's 37 foot-pounds, but it's kind of inconsistent where they give it to you on the step or make you look it up. Step 5. Reinstall the sway bar end links. This is where I deviated a bit and installed the rough country links. They're about 1 inch longer than the old ones. The bushings need to be installed in the rubber ends, but other than that, these were a direct bolt-on with a 13/16 socket and 7/8 wrench. Make sure the head of the bolt is towards the tire. Whoops, I already did step 6 when I installed the shocks. Step 7. Install the brake line drop brackets, tightened to 8 foot-pounds. These can only go on one way. You may need to bend the hard lines a bit to keep them from rubbing on the frame. I wasn't sure if I was going to need to keep this setup when I did the new brakes, but it's what was needed currently and easy enough to change if needed. Step 8. When running 35s, you need to trim the pinch seam and rock sliders. I'll see how much clearance I have and then decide. I do plan on modifying the sliders at some point. Step 9. Reinstall the wheels and tighten the lug nuts. Well, that's the rear finished. But wait, didn't it say not to tighten the track bar yet? And also it had us loosen all the suspension bolts but never told us to tighten them again? I didn't think about it until I had the rear tires installed. Then I triple checked the instructions to see if I missed anything. Nope, it never says to tighten any of that. Now, not to skip ahead, but the very last step of installing the front suspension says to tighten all the fasteners listed below to factory specs. I just feel like that was an easy way out of poorly written instructions. Don't forget to tighten everything we forgot to tell you to do. Anyway, I torqued all of the bolts and applied paint pen to make sure they don't come loose.
All the control arms are torqued. Breather line's hooked back up, and that park brake cable just snapped back up there easy enough.
Now you can see how it looks with a lift and 35s in the rear and stock with 33s on the front. Maybe I should have taken it to the drag strip. The rear took me about 7 hours to complete. I take my time on things, and I was filming, so that slows down progress as well. If you go in prepared, it could be quite a bit quicker. On to the front disassembly. Step 1. Raise the Jeep and support the frame. Support the axle with a jack and remove the wheels. I went with 4 jack stands again for safety. Watch your steering stabilizer while working the jack on the front axle. I ended up rubbing and bumping it some during the whole process, but it didn't seem to hurt it. Step 2. Loosen but do not remove all 8 control arm bolts. These are a mix of 18 and 21mm. I knew I'd have to remove the rear bolts on the arms at some point to install the geometry correction brackets, but I wasn't exactly sure when. The instructions were no help here. The lift instructions don't mention the brackets at all, and the bracket instructions just say to install them with all 4 wheels on the ground, which didn't seem ideal to me. So I just kept following the instructions and decided to figure it out as I went. The upper rear bolt on the passenger side is very close to the exhaust pipe. It wasn't too bad just to loosen it, but it's way more fun later when installing the geometry brackets. Step 3. Disconnect the drive shaft. Make sure to mark the alignment and support the end so it will not hang down and get damaged. These are 15mm bolts. I probably should have loosened it while the tires were still on the ground. I just put it in 4-wheel drive to keep the shaft from spinning. Make sure the wheels are chalked if you do this. Step 4. Loosen but do not remove the frame side track bar bolt. Remove and save the axle side, track bar bolt, and flag nut. Again, I needed to deviate from the instructions as I was installing a new front track bar. So I just went ahead and removed the whole thing at this point. The new JKS track bar is pretty beefy compared to the stock one. I went ahead and installed it in the configuration the instructions stated, with the top bolt loose and the bottom disconnected. I planned on installing everything else, then adjusting this to fit the centered axle. The old track bar ends were getting pretty loose. Step 5. On Rubicon models, remove the push pins holding the speed sensor wiring to the frame and upper control arm. Mine were clipped to the brake line and pinned between the shock and the spring. The push pins won't be reused as the whole bracket is removed. I would wait to do this step after the shocks are removed. Step 6. Remove and save all sway bar link hardware. 18mm on the lower bolt, then I used a 3/4 inch wrench for a backer, but it's probably a 19mm. Then the upper bolt was 18mm also. The stock rear links are about 4 inches longer than the stock front links. Step 7. Remove shocks and save all shock mounting hardware. The lower 18mm bolt was easy, but the top was a pain. I'm not a fan of this design, but 2 16mm wrenches eventually got it removed. Little did I know that the top mount on the new shocks would be more frustrating. Step 8. Lower the axle and remove the springs. I couldn't lower it nearly far enough due to the brake lines, which the next step is to remove the brake line bracket. This should be done before lowering the axle. These instructions do need some work. Step 9. For 2011 or newer models, remove and discard the factory bracket from the brake line. This takes a bit of work to peel the line out of there. Be careful not to damage your line if you don't plan on replacing it. I would have liked to do the brake upgrades at the same time as the lift, but due to time constraints, I would have to install them later. I also removed the front axle breather tube and unclipped the wire from the top of the front differential. Now I can lower the axle and remove the springs. At this point, it was probably time to install the geometry correction brackets while the front axle was all loose. The bracket instructions say to install with all 4 tires on the ground, but by now I didn't have much faith in their instructions and decided it'd be easier to do it now. Remove the upper and lower control arm bolts at the frame end. The driver's side was easy to remove. I decided to pre-assemble the brackets loosely before installing. Install the brackets. Use the factory hardware and supplied spacers, which will fill the void for the control arms.
So the trick is that slot has to go over this protrusion. Hard to see. There, see it sticking through? That's the only way to line up.
The upper flag nut is tricky to get back in there.
I eventually got it by running my arm up between the brackets. Then I could hold the nut back there to get it started.
Use the supplied hardware to mount the control arms in the new dropped locations. The top one was easy, but then I ran into a conundrum for the lower bolt.
But they only gave me 2 big washers, and obviously it's supposed to have 4 big washers. 2 washers, 2 washers, 2 washers, 2 washers. So I got 4 little ones and only got 2 big ones. And I poked around my random hardware bucket, and I found 2 that are basically exactly perfect. It's funny, looking at this closer now, even though their picture shows washers and nuts, these are flared nuts, so I don't even know that it needs a washer. So maybe they sent me the correct stuff and the picture doesn't match. I don't know. I guess we'll put it in there without it. It's a flared nut and see what it looks like. It's all Loctited down. And they said to put red Loctite on these big bolts on the bottom, so we'll go with that.
I needed to lift the axle some to get the lower arm to line up. The driver's side was easy enough, but now to deal with the exhaust being in the way on the passenger side.
And here's the problem over here, is I have this bolt backed out all the way and it's against the exhaust pipe. I'm not quite sure how much farther it has to go. Supposedly I can pry it out of the way, but I'm pretty sure when I put it back, I'm going to put the bolt through this way, put the nut on this end, and that'll solve all that problem. Instead of prying on it, I just jacked up the exhaust a little bit. Didn't take a lot. I think it'll clear pretty soon. Alright, so after jacking that up a bit, screwing out as far as I could, and I stuck a extension in there and hammered it out. Definitely running the bolt through this end and putting the nut on the other side. Alright, you can actually see a couple things to line up. We have the bushing and the bracket up there. If I can get those lined up, I can just poke this right on through in there. Just like that. Look at that. There it is. So this wasn't very easy going this way to get everything to line up and not drop that in there, and I think it was way easier than dealing with the exhaust pipe. Both of the geometry correction brackets are installed loosely. If you are putting the lift on at the same time, I would recommend doing these at this point and not at the end with all 4 tires on the ground. I don't know how you would do that. It would be hugely a pain. So I am glad I did it now. Even though it was a pain here, I think it's way less of a pain here than with everything hooked up. Because I still had to move the axle around quite a bit, forward, back, up and down. And look, I have no springs, shocks, nothing hooked up. It was literally dangling there. This made it way easier.
Now that the brackets are installed, we can go back to the lift instructions. Step 10, drill a 3/8 inch hole in the center of the axle bump stop pad. I used the new bump stop to locate the hole. The lift spring is only about 1 inch longer than the factory spring, but it has many more coils. Step 11 and 12, place the bump stop spacer inside the springs and install the springs. Keep factory isolator in place and index springs properly. Step 13, install and tighten bump stop spacer hardware. The bolt is 9/16 and it's straightforward and easy to install. Step 14, install new sway bar end link brackets. Once again, deviating here as I'm moving the stock rear links to the front. Step 15, assemble and install the shocks.
Oh man, there's barely room for a wrench up there. I don't know how there's going to be room for an Allen wrench and a wrench.
The new shocks are about 2.5 inches longer than the old ones. I inserted the top bolt into position, then the bottom one to hold it in place. I jacked up the axle to make room to install the top rubber, washer, and nut. The top of the shock takes a 5mm Allen and a 17mm wrench. I didn't want to remove the inner fender, so I found an extra Allen wrench and cut it off to fit in the slot easier. That top bolt on these front shocks was the most frustrating part of the whole job.
I've got about 3 threads sticking through the top. It all seems snugged up. That short Allen key worked out well.
The lower 18mm bolt is torqued to 56 foot-pounds. At this point, I went ahead and torqued the frame bolts on the geometry correction brackets. The flag nut even worked on the one bolt I flipped around, eliminating the exhaust pipe clearance issue. Now I can put the weight back on the axle at the new ride height, finish installing the track bar, torque all the bolts, and reinstall the drive shaft. I torqued the sway bar links, then all the suspension arms, hoping that would mostly center the axle so that the track bar could be adjusted and installed.
Everything is torqued and tightened except for the track bar. I measured from the frame to the outside of the rotor, and they're within a 1/4 inch of each other. So I don't think scooting it 1/8 of an inch one way or the other is going to matter. I think that's pretty close. I've got the track bar in and lined up. I don't know how you're supposed to tighten this big nut. Anything that's big enough to get in there there's not room to use. Or big enough to fit it, there's not room to use in here. Now, it's not like this can come unscrewed because, well, either end can't spin. I think this nut is just taking the backlash of the threads out, so I don't think it has to be real tight.
I ended up using a hammer and punch method for tightening the lock nut on the track bar. I didn't want to remove it to tighten it and risk messing up the alignment.
Here's how much thread's left on that adjustable track bar. There's only about 1 inch shorter it could go.
Index and reconnect the front drive shaft. It was torqued to a surprising 80 foot-pounds. Now back on track to the instructions. Step 16 doesn't apply to this one as it's a 2011. Step 17. For 2011 and newer, use zip ties to secure the brake lines. I don't like brake lines that are rubbing. My 94 Jeep rubbed a hole in the brake line once. That wasn't very fun. I bought new brake line brackets, but I'm about to upgrade all the brakes on this, so I'm just going to zip tie them for now. I'm sure it will be fine for about 1,000 miles until I do the brakes. I do wish I'd moved the lines and speed sensor wire behind the shocks, as I needed to do that for the brake upgrade later. Step 18. Reinstall the wheels. I found that a drywall install tool made it easier to lift the tires on. I guess I need to make a tool that's dedicated for that. Step 19. Tighten everything we forgot to tell you to do. I did this before I put the wheels back on, as it made it a lot easier.
Now these tires aren't hugely different in size, but man, the Jeep looks totally different. Here's full lock on the steering, and it doesn't rub like it did before. Check the other side here. So plenty of clearance. There's a squeaking. Well, I found the squeaking. There's a rock stuck between the shroud and the rotor. Drives plenty straight now. I mean, it drove straight before, so I mean that's good. But the bumps feel good. I might ride better than before. It's just, well, I can't complain about the handling. It's a lifted Jeep on 35's. Let's see, I'm reading about 46 there, 49 there. It's about 4 mile an hour difference, maybe 3 or 4. It was within 2 before. So no one behind me, I don't see anyone coming. Just test the brakes. It still brakes well. But it's gonna brake even better when I get the new brakes on it. All right, let's try braking one more time here. Well, I'm not sure you could slide the tires. Nope, that's hard as I could push. I mean, it still brakes pretty good, but ooh, I can smell them now, getting hot. I don't know if that's the tires getting hot or the brakes getting hot, but I can smell it. I tested the brake over angle on a hill by my house before and after the install. It has more clearance going over, but I didn't get the camera angle perfect. I used the JScan app to correct the speedometer, which was nice and easy. I also used it to adjust some other settings. I did some minor flex tests on a small convenient obstacle. There was no rubbing or binding issues. The rear tires clear the factory Rubicon sliders, but just barely. I do plan on modifying those in the future. I've put a couple thousand miles on the Jeep since the lift was installed, and I have 0 regrets.
It handles at least as well as it did before, and it rides even better. It may oversteer just a bit more, with a little bit more body roll, but it drives fantastic for a Jeep on 35s. I can't say enough good things about these Gladiator tires so far. They ride great and are the quietest mud tires on the road I've ever had. The braking was adequate with the stock brakes, but it will be improved with the new ones. Acceleration is lackluster, but it's fine for me in a Jeep. I'm glad it has the 410 gears. 456 would probably be best, but hopefully it has a LS swap at some point. So far, the JKS track bar, geometry correction brackets, and the sway bar links have been perfect. Overall, the quality of this kit was amazing, even if the instructions were lacking. Hopefully this video helps with that part. The job took me about 18 hours, but I'm kind of slow working on things, and filming added a lot of time. I'll follow this up with the brake install to complete this stage. I planned on doing it at the same time, but time constraints prevented that.